When Jesus was arrested and then died on a cross, everything looked out of control. But nothing could be farther from the truth. And that might be a lesson for us today, that we feel like life has thrown us a curveball and we can't imagine that God is still in control. But today, we're going to see that that's actually not true. God is always in control and has a really good plan. Join us today as we continue through Acts. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Acts in 10-ish series. Today we are only going to make it through one verse, Acts 2:24, and it's actually where we left off last week. Last week we ended with Peter standing up, giving this amazing sermon. It's the day of Pentecost. The Holy Spirit has shown up. Everything's changed. Peter now has boldness to go out and tell people about Jesus. So let's pick it up in Acts 2:24, and we're just going to kind of go off of this today and maybe hopefully learn a few lessons from this. But Acts 2:24 says, "But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power." Now what we see is that Jesus willingly laid his life down for us. Yes, he would die a horrible, horrible death. But because of that horrible death, something bad, something good happened. Jesus conquered death. And we saw that when he rose from the dead. I love this scene in Matthew when Jesus was arrested, because it's a reminder that no matter how bad things seem to look in your life, or at this point in Jesus' life, there was really a bigger picture in play. Matthew 26:50 says this, "And Jesus said to him, 'Friend, do what you have come for.' Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached out and drew out a sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear." This is in the Garden of Gethsemane when they were arresting Jesus. Jesus said, "Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Or do you think," and this is amazing, "or do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? How then will the scripture be fulfilled which say that it must happen this way?" Now imagine this, a legion, like 6,000 angels in a legion. So 12 legions are going to be like 72 amazing angels. All Jesus had to say was, "I need some angels." And 72,000 amazing, mighty, dazzling, glorious, overwhelmingly powerful angels would come to the Garden of Gethsemane and literally obliterate all the Roman soldiers and the temple police who were there. But Jesus did not do that. He didn't call on supernatural help that was readily available to him, because he knew it was time for him to voluntarily lay down his life, because there was a purpose behind it. Yes, it would be painful, but there was a purpose, and that was to die for our sin, you and me, so we could spend eternity with him when we surrender our life to him. But here's something to think about. The disciples looked at all this and thought everything was out of control, because everything looked out of control. But what we know is that nothing could be farther from the truth. Nothing. Some of you think your life at this point is out of control. And when life goes a different direction, we automatically think, well, God's not in this, and he doesn't understand, and he's not paying attention. But as followers of Jesus, as children of God, just like Jesus, we have to remember that God is always in control. What should that mean for you? Well, it should mean that you will automatically know that the divorce or the death was not random, that the loss of your job was not random, that your boyfriend breaking up with you was not random. It just wasn't. We do know this, that we live in a fallen world where bad things do happen. My cousin got in a head-on collision and died from a drunk driver. I mean, that's just part of living in a fallen world where people are alcoholics or they drive drunk. But it never meant that God was out of control. He could have stopped that at any minute. But the problem is that when pain comes into our life, we think God cannot possibly be a part of this bad stuff that's happening to me. But then we look at the scene where we see Jesus being arrested and about ready to go through the most excruciating pain anyone could go through. And yet all we can hear Peter say is, nope, all of this was in God's plan all along. And that just might be something you need to hear today. Maybe you think your life is miserable and it's just not going the way you want it to go. But with Jesus, we see bad, horrible things, painful things turn into good. And the reason why is that Jesus never quit. He persevered through the bad, knowing that God was in it and knowing there would be a good outcome. In Genesis, we just finished our Genesis study, and we actually saw Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, who was sold into slavery by his brothers. They hated him, they were jealous of him, so they sold him to traders on their way to Egypt. So he ends up in prison for doing something good, and yet 20 years later, he looks back and he says this to his brothers in Genesis 45:4. He says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Please come closer to me.' They came closer, and he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourself because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance.'" What if we could all have that same kind of attitude that Joseph had? He never played the victim. Poor me, my brothers were so mean to me and sold me into slavery. Now I'm in this foreign country and I don't even know the language, and I was falsely accused of rape, and now I'm in prison and my life is awful, and everyone should feel sorry for me. But he didn't do that. He chose instead to say, you know what? God is in this. I don't get it. He wouldn't get it for 20 years. Some of you might not get what's going in your life until 20 years from now. I wish I were a lot more like Joseph. When Rob and I were selling our company many, many years ago, it was up, down, up, down, up, down. Every day was different. One day they're going to buy it, the next day they're not, the next day they're going to cut the price. This just went on and on for actually, I think it was about 2 years. And I was a mess. And I was so frustrated. And with everything, every time there was a call, I was just kind of angry. And yet I should have been the one that was saying with joy, God's got this. He's in control. But for some reason, I just couldn't get there. It was really, really hard for me. And I was frustrated with God, and I couldn't see where he was leading us. And Rob was thinking about this sale one way, and I was thinking of it another way, and I was feeling sorry for myself, and I cried a lot, and mostly because I was just confused. But for me, I needed a good reminder back then that there was a big picture going on. And all I was getting were the bits and pieces. I couldn't see this overarching plan of God. And then I realized, I bet Joseph felt like that when he was in prison. I bet the disciples felt like this as they saw Jesus being arrested and being hung on a cross. How could they see a big picture in all this when everything they knew just kind of fell apart? The good thing for you and I is that we have the Bible, the very words of God. Psalm 119:105 says this, "Your word," the Bible, "is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path." Now for me, I expected God to do a big, one of those big lights that can shine like a mile ahead. I wanted to know what was happening up there. But think about a lamp. The word is a lamp, not a headlight. A lamp only goes so far. A lantern can only you can only see a step at a time. The lamp is meant to just one step, you can just see one step in front of you. So for me, and I couldn't see that headlight view, I finally had to say, all right, I give. I don't know what you want from this sale of this business. It's like we go one step forward, 2 steps back, but you know what? I feel like I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on. So I'm going to quit whining, and I'm going to quit feeling sorry for myself. And I'm just going to trust that you know exactly what you're doing. That's the point I had to get to. And I think God probably sighed a big sigh of relief and said, it's about time, Lisa, that you just give it over to me and let me handle it the way I need to. But I spent a lot of time feeling sorry for myself. And I realized we all have that choice in life. I have the choice to feel sorry for myself, and so do you. Maybe your boss treats you bad. Maybe you have the worst job around and your boss is kind of mean to you and he treats you unfairly and he works you overtime and you don't get a raise and all you want to do is whine and be miserable about that. Maybe some of you are feeling sorry for yourself because your husband's kind of a jerk. And you're like, well, my husband doesn't talk to me and he just sits in front of the TV and he doesn't take me out to dinner and movie like he does, like my friend's husband does with her. Maybe you're feeling sorry for yourself because your parents were unfair. They took made you turn your phone off at 9 o'clock at night, or maybe your curfew changed to earlier. Who knows? The problem is that we have a choice in how we're going to respond. Because when we play the victim, then we're going to do things that are stupid. A lot of people will just quit your job out of anger or get your divorce because you hate your husband or run out and do stupid stuff, sinful stuff, just because you're just like, I'm just miserable. And all of that is because we don't like how our life is going. But this is a great reminder to us to look at Jesus. He never, ever played the victim. In fact, he chose to stay on the really, really difficult, hard path and just trust God. He was arrested, beaten, convicted, nailed to a cross, spit on, laughed at. All of his friends deserted him. No one would help him. And anyone who was watching would have assumed that Jesus had no control over the situation. But guess what? Appearances can be deceiving. He was not under Roman control. He was not powerless. Like I said, he could have called 72,000 angels to handle this for him. But he didn't, because he realized something bigger was going on. Something bigger was going on than his happiness or his comfort. He had a mission. And the mission was to die on a cross to save you and me. And he would persevere to the end. He was not a victim, no matter how much it looked like it. He willingly chose physical pain. He willingly chose, people hating him. He willingly chose death over life. And what this tells us is that we don't have to be a victim either. But that is a choice on your part and on my part. How could Jesus go to the cross and suffer all that pain? How did Joseph stay in prison and keep a smile on his face? And I think it's this: they both knew that God had a purpose for there we were. It would be nice if I could talk. They both knew that God had a purpose for where they were, no matter how unpleasant as it was. When we begin to understand that, our attitude will not be one of frustration and anger and bitterness. We will be filled with the Holy Spirit, and we will be able to produce peace and joy and confidence that God knows what He's doing in really tough situations. Because honestly, think about this. What if the job that you hate, that when you go there and you lovingly serve and you have humility and you love your boss even though he's a jerk, what if that is part of God's plan to bring your boss to Christ? How about your husband? Your husband isn't that great, but what if you realize, you know what? God has me in this marriage for a reason, a purpose. I'm going to pray for my husband. I'm going to love him. I'm going to show all the people around me that know my husband is a jerk that I can do this because I have the Spirit of God living within me. What if you don't like your parents? Maybe you just start praying for them instead. See, Jesus voluntarily gave his life up so people could spend eternity in heaven. What if you voluntarily stayed somewhere that doesn't make you happy for the sake of maybe someone else finding Jesus? And you can probably say at this point, well, Lisa, you don't understand. You don't understand my situation. My husband, my parents, my boss, they don't want anything to do with Jesus. They just think I'm crazy. Well, people thought Jesus was crazy. The Jews thought he was nuts. Pilate and the Roman soldiers, they wanted nothing to do with him. It doesn't matter. It's not your job to save them. It's only your job to be different and to love them. Never forget this. People only have as much control over you as God allows. Look at John 19:9. Pilate took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave no answer. "You won't talk to me?" Pilate demanded. "Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or to crucify you?" I bet Jesus was laughing, okay? Pilate seriously thought he had control over Jesus. And Jesus said this, "You would have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above. When your boss or husband or parents say, I have control over you, you need to remember that there is someone way above them, which is God himself. Think how different our attitudes in life would be if we thought, you know what, since God controls them and he has put me here at this place of employment or in this marriage, then you know what, I know that there's a purpose for me here. Look at John 10:17. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. As Jesus hung on the cross helpless, he appeared helpless, he appeared powerless, but he was more in power and in control than ever. We saw it in the life of Joseph. He appeared powerless the whole time. He was sold into slavery. God allowed it because God needed him in Egypt. He was falsely accused of rape, appeared powerless, but God allowed it. He needed him in prison. He was sent to prison, appeared powerless. God allowed it because God needed him to meet Pharaoh, and the only way that would happen is if he were in prison. See, from a human viewpoint, it looks like the brothers were all in control of this. Potiphar's wife was in control of this when she screamed, rape. But God had authority over every single person and every single situation, even though it didn't look like it. Pilate thought he was carrying out his own plan, and yet really Pilate was carrying out God's plan when he crucified him. Joseph's brothers actually thought they were carrying out their own jealous rage and plan. Nope, it was really all God's plan. It's the best news ever. You don't have to feel like you're a victim anymore. When you can see a big picture and know that God is always in it, then you can sit back and say, you know what? I'm going to let God work in the situation. I'm going to turn I'm not going to play the victim anymore. I'm going to trust that God knows what he's doing. We need to stop looking at the things that happen in our life with worldly eyes, victim eyes. Instead, we need to look at it through God's eyes. We need to stop focusing on, our inward and I'm so sad and this isn't fair. We need to stop that. Because Joseph was in prison for a crime he did not create. Jesus was hung on a cross. He never did one bad thing in his life. But they willingly let God use them to save others. And that's where I want to leave it today. And the question is, will you let God use you? Will I let God use me in tough situations? Or are we going to play the victim and then waste our life? Thankfully, Joseph or Jesus did not do that. Hope that helps today. Have a really good day.